So good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining our Secure Cloud-Based Sharing and Storage webinar today. We have Elizabeth Murphy, our Vice President of Sales and Marketing, who will be presenting the first half of our presentation. And then Sanford Bingham, our President and CEO, will be presenting the demonstration. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to Elizabeth Murphy.
Thank you, Kristen. In this webinar, we're going to be looking at the security issues with cloud deployment for document storage and distribution. Now, I'd like to just take you briefly through today's agenda. We're going to be looking at the industry trends in online sharing and what do the leading research providers say about it. And we're going to explore what the associated risks are and what can FileOpen do to provide a solution. Finally, we'll summarize our value proposition and our typical workflow, and then we'll put all that theory into action so that you can see it in production in a live demo. You know, I think it's a truism that in today's workplace, work is everywhere. It's at home, it's en route, it's in the office, you know, and sadly that also means it's often in vacation time. But it definitely means that users today need access to documents offline when they can't connect to the internet. They need to be able to access documents on their iDevices. They need access outside of the firewall. In essence, they need access to business information anywhere, anytime, worldwide. In addition to this, people now need to access documents on multiple devices. BYODs are prevalent everywhere, and non-company devices are very often in use. As you probably know from your own experience, the number of devices that people have and need to access documents on is expanding rapidly. Just a few years ago, it was normal for people to have maybe 1 or 2 devices, but now that can range across iPhones, Androids, iPads, Macs, PCs. The list just keeps expanding. Now, the demand for access is presenting a huge problem for people, for IT people, who are constantly trying to balance empowering the users to give them the information they need to make business decisions with the due diligence that companies need to protect their information. And as you can see here from this research from Forrester, the number one priority for a user, from a user's perspective, is accessibility to the documents. It's first and foremost. So where does this leave IT professionals? Well, there's an increasing demand to use cloud storage as a solution so that users can have quick and easy access to data wherever they may be. Some organizations have deployed cloud storage and distribution. Some have complete cloud deployment and distribution, and others have none at all. And the reason for this is that for many organizations, storing data in the cloud presents an unacceptable security risk. So what can be done to protect that? Well, an IT manager recently told me that his 10-year-old son had asked him for an example of an oxymoron, and his immediate thought was Dropbox for Business. Now, I joke about that because Dropbox is probably the least secure of the cloud offerings in the business world. But it's not just Dropbox. Every single cloud distribution offering has its own security drawbacks. So, for example, Box, who are probably at the more protected and secure end of the market, for their users, once the users can access the documents, they can forward those documents with their credentials to any other user. So your security, even using something like Box, is only as good as your weakest link in your distribution. And I spoke to Box about this, and I said, you know, once the user has the document, if they forward that, there's nothing stopping that information from getting out to unauthorized users. And their response was, well, you can track that, and then you can rectify it by severing the link for that user. But the problem is that that information is then already out. You can't unsend that information once it's been sent to an unauthorized user, and that unauthorized user has been able to access it. I've spoken to a number of CTOs who work with the cloud distribution providers, and I point out the security risks to them, and that the response is generally, and I quote, that they don't have the bandwidth for this right now. For me, working in the security field, that makes about as much sense as Gwyneth Paltrow's recent statement on conscious uncoupling. What does that mean? How can you not put your documents into the cloud without the security that should go around that company information to make sure that unauthorized users cannot access it? Well, for the purposes of this webinar, we'll interpret the cloud distribution providers as saying really it's not their problem. And it's not their problem, it's your problem. Because it's IT people like you whose job it is to keep the company data safe. And I think IT professionals are constantly feeling pressured to allow users access to these enticing new tools that they can't because it opens up a huge security risk. And therein lies the conundrum. The cloud presents enormous potential for the ease of storage, distribution, sharing of data, but for many organizations, the downside, the risk, is just unacceptable. So what can FileOpen provide as a balance for these risks? Well, what we see in the market is not a trend where cloud deployment is going away. So if you can't beat it, you might as well join it. And that's what we've been doing. We've been joining up with the cloud providers to add the security level that they're missing. So what we provide is the mechanism by which you can upload documents to the cloud and have the proper control and compliance placed on those documents before they're shared in the cloud. What we can also do is provide real-time access to those documents so that users can carry on being productive in their business field without any hindrance or any obstacles to accessing the data. We can also work with existing infrastructure, for example, authentication through Active Directory. You can also carry on storing your documents if you want in SharePoint. Whatever you choose to do, whether it's cloud deployment or local deployment, you can secure your documents first so that when they actually go out to distribution, you can control them at all times. So a little bit about FileOpen. We've been in operation now since 1997, which makes us extremely old as far as a software company is concerned. But we're very proud to say that we have the largest footprint of any DRM provider worldwide. We have over 1,700 clients worldwide, with literally millions and millions of end users accessing secure documents every single day. In fact, there are millions of documents that have been secured that have organizations relying on our technology to protect the data within those documents. We have clients throughout every industry sector, so across legal, financial, you name it, wherever an organization has a requirement to protect their information, FileOpen can provide a solution. As you can see from some of these logos, we partner with the most prestigious software companies in the world. So we are an Adobe strategic security partner, and we have been since 1997. We are also very proud to announce that we're IBM's go-to-market solution provider for their WebSphere e-commerce platform. We also work with major software providers who are providing alternatives to the Adobe Reader, for example, Nuance and Foxit. And as I mentioned earlier, we work with all of the major cloud distribution providers so that you can secure your documents before you deploy them to the cloud. Now I mentioned I mentioned that we have a number of clients, but we don't rest on our laurels when it comes to customer satisfaction. We're constantly pushing the barrier to make sure that we're developing the product to be at the forefront of technology. We were the first to develop a solution, a secure solution for the iPads, for the iPhones, for Android. We've been the first to push the product to HTML5, which will be the ubiquitous, easiest access for secure documents. Now, HTML5 is something that's up and coming. Not all organizations have adopted it. So we do have alternatives for those organizations if they want to have another method of deploying and accessing the documents without HTML5. So where do we stand in terms of accessibility? We're constantly forward-looking in terms of making the documents more accessible for the users. So we support PDF, obviously, but we also support MS Office protection, and we also support delivering the documents in an OPN wrapper, which means for the user, there's no need to download any devices or any clients on their devices. And as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to put the documents into the easiest of access deliveries, which is HTML5. And we believe that HTML5 will become the gold standard for delivering secure documents. So here's an example of some of our clients, and as I mentioned, they really do transgress all of the industry sectors. Some of our most prestigious ones is Rolls-Royce, for example, where they had a very sensitive document that needed to be distributed to 300 senior managers, and the document could only be accessed by the CEO. It was that sensitive. Now, what that entailed was the CEO himself encrypting the document and then distributing it personally to 300 end users throughout the organization. We also have Disney as a client, and Disney use our technology to protect their work visas, which they send worldwide for their workers on their cruise line ships. And it's essential that those users can only print that document once because it's a very sensitive work visa. So for compliance and regulations, they need to be able to ensure that that document is protected and controlled at all times. We also have lots of clients within the financial sector, for example, Euromoney, Deutsche Bank. Most of the major financial institutions worldwide use our technology. Okay, so how does File Open work in reality, in production? What happens is that you always have the ability to protect your documents locally. So encryption always happens within your own environment. There's no need to upload those documents in order to secure them. Once you have secured them locally, you then have a choice to distribute those documents as you wish. So, for example, you can upload them to ShareFile or Box or Dropbox or anywhere in the cloud. You can also store them on your local servers for access through something like, perhaps Active Directory. You can also distribute those documents in other methods via email, via DVD, on an FTP site, however you wish to do it. The key component, however, is that the encryption, the protection happens before the documents are distributed. Once you've done that, you can then control who can access the documents to make sure that they're not accessed by unauthorized users. You can unshare a document at any time if you feel, for example, that a user is no longer qualified to receive the documents. You can also revoke a document at any time. So, for example, if a document goes out in error or you want to control versions of documents, you can withdraw a document from circulation instantaneously. You can also stop users from copying, forwarding, editing, save as, print to PDF. All of those mechanisms which are used by people to circumvent security are blocked using File Open. So what is our value proposition? What we're saying is that the cloud presents an enormous opportunity to enable business organizations to deploy information so that the end users can have quick and easy access. And that is certainly a very admirable capability to have for any organization. You don't need to worry about the risk of putting your documents in the cloud, because using FileOpen technology, you can secure those documents so that they're 100% controlled by you, regardless of which cloud provider you use, which mechanism of deploying that information you use. It's safe. Your documents are secure. You can meet compliance, and you can keep control of your documents anywhere at any time. So you don't need to worry about your valuable IP being diluted. You don't need to worry about your revenue going down the drain because somebody's forwarding a document that they should really have purchased. And you don't need to worry about compliance standards because FileOpen meets all of the industry standards for compliance. So we're going to be showing you an integration with Box, and we just chose Box because it's one that's most widely used in business. The security flaw with Box is that once a user has a document, as I mentioned earlier, there's nothing stopping them taking that document and forwarding it to as many people as they want with their credentials. Once that document is out, as I mentioned, there's no putting it back. So if it's something that's super sensitive and and you want to apply security, with Box it's not going to give you that security unless you encrypt it before you deploy it to Box. So what we're going to be looking at is the end user's perspective. We're going to be looking at a secure document that needs to be deployed to Box, but we need to make sure that only the intended recipients can access that document. And when they access that document, we're going to be controlling what they do with it and for how long they can access it for. Excuse me. So I'd like to hand you over now to Sanford Bingham, who's going to be taking you through the demonstration and putting all this theory into practice. We'd be delighted to take any questions you may have at the question and answer session at the end. And thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy this part of the presentation. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for attending. So today what we'll be demonstrating is integration with cloud storage providers in order to create an end-to-end encrypted secure distribution portal using the storage capabilities of those cloud storage vendors. We'll be showing the ability to filter what links users see and which documents those users can open. And we'll show revocation of those documents even after they've been downloaded to the user's desktop. But first, a few words about the principles behind this demonstration. And one of those is a founding principle of the FileOpen systems that we began to express some 15 years ago when we founded the company. And the principle is that we believe that publishers are taking a risk, and sometimes a large risk, when they obtain DRM functionality or security functionality generally from the same vendor that is providing the application and file format that they're using. And the reason for that is that we believed in the early days that it would be ultimately the case that there would be a number of different viewers for PDF files, and that only one of those viewers for PDF files would support Adobe's DRM. And the reason for that was that Adobe had no incentive to license its DRM to the vendors of competitive viewers. And indeed, that has turned out to be the case, that there is in Adobe Reader and Acrobat there are a number of different DRM solutions available, one of them from FileOpen. another from Adobe, and some others. But of those DRM solutions that are available in Adobe Reader, only one of them is available also in the competitors to Adobe Reader, and that is the FileOpen solution. FileOpen is a neutral vendor. Will provide our technology to any PDF distribution viewer vendor. And we believe that ultimately, in order to succeed, a DRM vendor must adopt that stance, that there is a natural tendency for individual vendors to restrict their own DRM technology to their own viewer application, and that ultimately the prevailing vendor for DRM will be the one that works across multiple applications. And the reason for that is that nobody likes to have multiple DRM solutions with different logins, different credentials, different mechanisms underneath them. It is disadvantageous to have islands of security. It is preferable to have a unified experience across multiple applications. And that is one of the things that FileOpen has tried over these years to provide. In the current environment, we begin to see a similar dynamic playing out with cloud storage vendors. There are a number of cloud storage vendors, and some of them are beginning to offer some security within their offerings, viewer technologies and tying the opening of documents to specific logins to the cloud storage vendor. But as before, none of those vendors have any incentive to license or share their security technology with their competitors. The security is being developed as a competitive advantage by each of these vendors independently without any coordination, and the result of that is potentially another set of islands of security, with each cloud storage vendor offering a unique and incompatible security solution that will not work with any other cloud storage vendor. We think that's not a good situation, and our solution to it is to provide a single layer across any cloud storage provider's offering, provided that that cloud storage provider has an open API, and nearly all of them do. And the result for end users is a single user experience across multiple devices, regardless of which cloud storage vendor is actually hosting the content on the back end. So let me now demonstrate here the opening of documents using the FileOpen Viewer solution with a back end, we're drawing those documents from Dropbox initially, and then at the end we'll show also the use of the Box.net technology. I'll begin then with a browser, and if I go to the URL that you can see in my address bar, fo.pnsbing, and this is a URL shortening technology that we've developed. The FOPN bit is ours, and the part after it can be any arbitrary string associated with a particular publisher. And the first thing that will happen when I go to this page is that I'll be requested for my username. And when I type in my own username, sbingham@fileopen.com, I will see a listing of documents, and there are 4 of them. And you'll note that they have the green icon of OPN files. We'll come back in a moment to what that means. Here now is another machine. This is I'm remotely logged into a different piece of hardware. And when I do the same thing, going to the same URL on this second piece of hardware, I'm again queried for credentials. And if I here give the credentials of another user, Malcolm, our CTO, I see a different set of documents. It's actually, file names are the same, but they are different documents insofar as in one case they're PDFs, in the other case they are OPN files. I'll now, well, let me open one of the PDFs here as Malcolm. I should be queried for credentials momentarily. And I will provide Malcolm's credentials. and I'll see a PDF. And I'll ask you to note the watermarks. We'll come back in a moment to what is meant by these watermarks. So this is an encrypted PDF open from the web. The same PDF could be distributed in other ways as email attachment or any number of different ways on a CD-ROM, etc. When I opened it, there was a client-server interaction, and there are other webinars that go into more detail about what goes on there. But the key points are that I got the document, or Malcolm got the document open, and the document was watermarked for Malcolm. That was a PDF. So here now is the same document as an OPN, and while I'm doing that, I will also bring up a screen share from an iPad, an iOS device, logged into the very same site as me, and also showing the same 4 documents. And let me open the same document on the iPad as well. And what we should see is that the same content is displayed in both cases, and each time there is a watermark that is unique to the user that's opening it, me, and the time at which it was opened. So 1731:52 in one case, 1731:35 in the other. Those watermarks are real-time watermarks that get updated each time the document is opened. So that is the fundamental end user experience, that documents look the same regardless of whether they're PDF or OPN, and if they're OPN files, they look the same on Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android. I'm showing only iOS here, but I'll ask you to believe that the Android experience is identical to the iOS. And they also look the same when saved to local disk and viewed in our browser. So let me save this document to disk. I click the Save button. I got a Save dialog, and now we see this OPN file appear on my desktop. And if I double-click this document, we'll open it in the Zero Install File Open Desktop viewer. And let me point out that this is indeed a zero install. There is no requirement that users have any administrative credentials, and in order to run this, it's simply an exe that needs to be launched, and it is available, or shortly will be available, on our website. There's also a Macintosh version of this, and we expect that there'll be a desktop Linux version as well. And you'll see that the watermark is the same here as it is in the web version of it, the browser version. So all of this is based on Adobe Flash. There will be, in the next couple of months, an HTML5 adjunct to this, but for now we're using Adobe Flash for this solution. So having now distributed this document in this consistent way across multiple operating systems and devices, let me become briefly the publisher of this document, and I will revoke the document to show that it indeed can be revoked. So the one that we just opened was this one, and what I'll do is go into the permission server. So in the model that we're just describing here, there's a file distribution mechanism, viewer.fileopen.com, which can also be hosted by any of our licensees who chooses to have that running in their own data center. The technology of viewer.fileopen.com can be installed elsewhere as well. Certainly the OPN distribution is already in operation in a number of our licensees. So there is actually no requirement that any bytes in this chain of events travel through any server controlled by FileOpen, but the example that I'm using here is our rights manager hosted backend and FileOpen viewer. So if I go to the document that I'm opening here and I revoke that document, we should see a couple of things happen. And I should point out, incidentally, that there are a number of different ways that documents can be revoked. They can, particular users can be denied access to specific documents without affecting the behavior of other users. Documents can be made to expire, can have embargo, and so forth. But here what I'll do is globally revoke the document so that nobody can open it anymore. And the first thing we should notice is that when we go back to the listing that we saw previously, that document no longer appears in the listing. And I'll refresh the iOS version of it as well. And we should see that where there were 4 documents in that listing previously, there are now only 3. The reason for that is that the user that's accessing the page, or when a user accesses the page, there's a call back to the permission server to determine which of the documents in the listing should be displayed in that listing. And since the VDR document is no longer accessible, it will no longer appear in the list. But you'll recall that I did download it and have it here on my local machine. So what happens to that document? Well, the answer is that when I try to open that document, I'm told that it is not available for the duration of this webinar. Well, let's suppose that my goal is not to have that message, but some other message. So let me go in to the permission server and change that message to something more generic. Instead of saying for the duration of this webinar, I'll just say the document is not available. And I'll save that change. And if I now try to open the same document again, I will get the message in question. Now, of course, I can also go back and re-enable that document. And if I do that, the document will again appear in the list and again open for the users that have access to it. So I'll open this document again here. I'll go back to the list, refresh this list. So here's the document opened in the desktop viewer. Here it is again in the list. If I refresh the iOS device, we'll see it there again. Okay. So that is the user-specific filtering and permissioning that we offer. And how does that relate to cloud storage providers? Well, if you look at the address bar of my browser here, you can see that there's it says dbox, and this is our Dropbox implementation. So the listing, again, that I see here and that Malcolm, my other user, sees on that virtual machine, this is a subset of the documents that are resident in a particular cloud storage provider, in this case Dropbox. So you see, if I go into my Dropbox, there are 8 documents, I guess, in there, and they're each document once as an OPN and once as a PDF. And these documents are each in different permission groups in the permission server, and Malcolm has access to the group that contains all the PDFs, and Sanford has access to the group that contains all the OPNs, and that's the reason why we see these filtered lists. If I then ask, well, how did those documents get to Dropbox? The answer is that they got to Dropbox through the Dropbox application, which is watching a folder on my local machine. And any document that appears in this folder on my local machine will also appear in the listing on the web. So another way to get rid of a document, in this case truly to get rid of the document rather than simply to hide the document, is that I can delete it from my Dropbox locally on my machine. That will then propagate up to the web, where if we refresh this, you saw it disappear there. And if we, that was the PDF, so if we go to Malcolm's listing now and refresh this listing, there are now only 3 documents because one of them has been removed. Another thing, by the way, that we can do here is modify the visual appearance of this page by editing in any file locally on my machine. And again, this what you see here is Windows Explorer listing of a local file on my machine. So if we decide that the title of this page should not be demonstration files, but rather webinar demonstration files, then we change this local file, which then gets changed on Dropbox, and when we refresh this page, we see the modified text. So these pages are entirely, well, as configurable as we've been able to make them so far via simple text editing on a local machine, a local file. And this, we think, is a very important point that deserves to be brought out, that another of our core principles is that it should not be the case that secure distribution of documents relies upon the insecure uploading of documents to some website. That is to say, that if the purpose of the encryption is to be sure that the documents are not accessible to anyone but the intended recipients, it is not, as it were, getting off on the right foot to upload the unencrypted document to some cloud storage vendor's website in unencrypted form in order to have it encrypted up there and then distributed. Rather, we believe the encryption should take place locally within the document owner's environment, and only the encrypted files should be uploaded to the cloud storage provider. Otherwise, one is trusting that cloud storage provider not to view or otherwise manipulate the unencrypted documents. So we provide, and there are also webinars that go into more detail about this, we provide a mechanism for the local encryption of documents. So let me quickly demonstrate that. I will take a PDF from my desktop, and I will drop it into a folder. This is a folder that is being watched by the FileOpen Rights Manager encryption solution, which is a local install for Windows. And I should point out that in order to use the technology that I'm using here, all that one needs is a login or an account, if you like, on the FileOpen Rights Manager system, and a single Windows PC that is connected to the internet. Of course, one also needs the ability to create files and so forth, but all that is needed to securely publish those files is to be able to drop them into a watched folder. So this document that I dropped into the folder should now appear momentarily in my output folder, and the output folder of the encryption process that I'm using is also the input folder for Dropbox, and we should see that document appear in the Dropbox listing momentarily. And so let me go to the end here and see if that's going to appear. There it is. Okay, so here's the PDF version that has been encrypted, and we should, in just a moment, see also the OPN version. And if we go up to the permission server, we'll see that document appear in the listing. Here it is as both a PDF and an OPN. And if we go to the page that is me, we see the two of them. And if we go to the page that is accessed by Malcolm, we should see them both, or neither of them actually. So let me go in here and modify them so that they match the characteristics that we had previously. And by that, I mean that the OPN should be in the FileOpen Viewer group, and that's actually correct. I didn't have to change that. But the other one, the PDF, should be not in the FileOpen Viewer group, but rather in the group called View Only. And as I say, not in the FileOpen Viewer group. So I'll take it out of the FileOpen Viewer group. And now when I refresh Malcolm's listing, I see that file appear. And when I refresh my listing, I should see the PDF version disappear. So that is how one can use Dropbox in this case to distribute documents for specific users with identity management handled by the rights manager application so that each user sees only those documents that they should be allowed to. And by the way, I should point out that the filtering is an optional technology. If I turn off the filtering and refresh, it may take a second. Let's see if it got there in time. Let me keep refreshing. If I turn off the filtering and refresh the two listings, now I will, as Malcolm, see all the documents, and as Sanford, see all the documents as well. So that is integration with Dropbox. We are also at this point finishing off, I should say, although it is not completely finished, the next integration that we'll do, which is with Box.net. So here is a document that is being opened. In fact, the same document that we were just encrypting here, not literally the same instance of the document, because the one in Box was put up there previously, but the experience is the same in Box.net as it is in from Dropbox. And if we, in this case, what's happening is that the file open viewer is obtaining the bytes of the document from Box.net instead of Dropbox. And we will proceed from Box to do a number of the other integrations that we have planned with ShareFile and Ignite and G Drive and so forth. And the principle, again, is that it should not be significant to a publisher which cloud storage vendors or vendor is being used to host documents. The cloud storage is, from our perspective, essentially a commodity technology that can be bought for whatever reasons that one chooses to pick one of those vendors over another, but it should not be treated as a mechanism for secure distribution of files simply because to do so is to accept a lock-in to a particular cloud storage vendor's security technology. And instead, we believe it is preferable for you to have the option to mix and match and move between cloud storage vendors while providing a consistent, unified interface for all your users across multiple devices. And with that, I will say thank you very much for your attention, and we'll look forward to questions either in this webinar or by email. Thank you again. I'll give it back to Kristen.